Welcome everyone to Over Under, presented by the TFC. I'm Robert Ryan from Tales from the Creek Entertainment, and I am joined once again by Lee Jansen of Best at Losing on YouTube. Lee, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
I'm doing really good. I'm very, I was looking forward to this episode a lot. Today's episode is going to be something a little different. This isn't going to be about us listening to tracks and giving our opinions of whether or not the tracks themselves are over or underrated. We're coming right out and declaring follow-up singles to so-called one-hit wonders as underrated compared to their more overrated hit songs. So basically, we are looking at artists that have been declared one-hit wonders, who, you know, obviously went and released a second or third single in some cases, and we are coming out and saying, you know what? You probably shouldn't have written these people off completely because maybe some of the follow-up songs were better, or at least not as grating or annoying in some cases, which we'll get to later. So,
correct.
This is an idea that you brought up when we were discussing possible ideas for shows, so I'm going to go ahead, open up the floor, and I'm going to let you explain your point of view on this in a little more detail based on kind of my overview, introduction, what have you.
Sure. Well, it's exactly what you described. I think that a lot of artists end up being kind of defined by the one song, whereas in a lot of cases, they probably had 5 or 10 songs that were better, but for some reason they just didn't catch on. In terms of my choice for this, and I'll describe it, I'll give it later. Technically, the song I chose, or the band I chose, was not necessarily a one-hit wonder, but they had one song which was so much more popular than every other song they've had that I define them as a one-hit wonder anyways, and it upsets me that their other songs are not as popular. So that was the thinking behind it. Maybe we need to start recognizing these bands as more than just one song.
Okay, so with that in mind, what is the track? Well, first let's start with the band that you selected. What's the band that you picked, or artist that you picked for this particular episode?
So I went back to the early 80s and picked one of the most kind of iconic 80s bands there with A Flock of Seagulls.
Okay, so what are
anybody who knows...
No, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry about that. Did you want the songs that I chose?
I was going to say, what were the songs that you picked? You picked from Flock of Seagulls. Obviously, I guess I shouldn't say obviously because I don't know how many of our listeners will remember a song from 30 plus years ago, but there is that one iconic song, which I'm pretty sure most people will recognize when we hear it. So we'll skip the title of that one. What's the other song that you picked from A Flock of Seagulls?
So the song that I find is underrated is Space Age Love Song.
Okay, so let's have a listen to that right now. So that was a clip from Space Age Love Song, released in May of 1982. Let's have a listen to its more famous older brother from March of 1982, probably something most people will recognize. And that, of course, was I Ran So Far Away by A Flock of Seagulls. So, Lee, tell us about these two songs.
Well, the first thing I want to kind of establish is that my saying that Space Age Love Song is an excellent song that deserves more recognition in no way is a knock on I Ran. I actually love I Ran. I think there's a reason why it's kind of an iconic 80s song. I think everybody probably remembers that great, I think it was a Diet Pepsi commercial where the guy had the flock of seagulls hair. A Flock of Seagulls had a very distinct look, and I Ran is the song that's associated with them, and everybody, by extension of that, associate I Ran with the 80s. So I just wanted to kind of get that out of the way. And there's actually a lot of similarities between the two songs, and I think that's why it upsets me a little bit that Space Age Love Song doesn't get the recognition that I Ran did. Both songs are laced with tons of synthesizer. That's pretty typical of most 80s music, but this is exceptionally synthesizer heavy. Both have extremely catchy guitar riffs. I think that's the distinct part of both songs that everybody can remember. Where I find it's a little difference is that I find that Iran's chorus sounds a little bit like a whiny kid to a certain degree. You know what I mean? It's just I ran. You know, it just kind of sounds like a whiny kid. And Space Age's Love Song is much more laid back and melodic. It's kind of pleasant to the ear. It's something I want to listen to more. Whereas I Ran, I'm kind of like, this is part of the song I have to accept. But if it was sung without the cool music and the cool look to the video, and if I didn't associate it with the 80s and that great commercial and everything else, I wouldn't want to necessarily just hear the singer sing the chorus.
Okay. Now, you bring up an interesting point with the video. Do you think that the video had a lot to do with the fact that I Ran So Far Away became such a hallmark song of A Flock of Seagulls? Because that was a really interesting / bizarre type of video.
I can't imagine it didn't help. Granted, if you really think about it, in those days, videos didn't sell music quite as much as they did a little bit later on. I think this 83, this really early in terms of the time of the videos. I think mid 80s, it's where it kind of started kicking in a little more. I think there's a few things. I think I think I Ran is a little bit more radio friendly because it's a little more, I'd say, upbeat and a little more. At least the vocals are a little more kind of at the forefront, whereas Space Age Love Song kind of the vocals are kind of a little bit more airy, a little bit more in the background.
A lot more atmospheric.
I think so. Now, the one thing I wanted to the one big difference between the two in terms of what makes me like one over the other, for me, it's just a personal taste thing. One of the things I like most about music is how I can relate to it or how it can bring me to a specific place. And when I hear I Ran, it makes me think of all those kind of jokey, corny things about the 80s that we all love. But when I hear Space Age Love Song, it makes me reminisce about my younger days. It makes me think of my friends. It makes me think of the first time I had a crush for a girl. It makes me think of family trips. It makes me think of kind of that same time, but it makes me think of specific things to my life rather than the I Ran kind of just imagery of the 80s that pops into my mind when I hear it.
Well, I think it's funny that you mentioned the Pepsi commercial, sort of that retro-styled Pepsi commercial where it was, I think the premise was, how do you want to relive your youth? And, you know, exactly. He gets transported back to the sort of like the stoner van with the sunset painted on the side and the Flock of Seagulls haircut, and then just decides to drink a Pepsi instead. It's funny that you mention that because where I think this song gained a lot of new popularity, or at least kind of got a resurgence in popularity, was back in 2002 when it was used in the TV commercial for Grand Theft Auto Vice City. It was the main theme used to sell the commercial for Grand Theft Auto Vice City, which was pretty interesting. It was actually used in the video game itself as well. And I thought you were going to mention that, especially since, of course, with the Best at Losing the Video Game connection, I thought it was pretty funny. Another thing that I found as kind of an interesting connection / side note, Space Age Love Song was used as part of the soundtrack to the add-on to Grand Theft Auto Vice City called Vice City Stories back in 2006. So when I was looking up these songs and just sort of listening and then kind of looking into the back history of them, I'm like, I wonder if he realizes the connection or if he picked it because of the connection. I just thought it was an interesting little tidbit.
Yeah, I'll be completely honest. I never even thought of it. Don't get me wrong. I played a little bit of Vice City. I'm not a huge Grand Theft Auto guy, but I had a roommate who had the game back in the day, and I played it, and I did love I think that's they had an '80s radio channel you could listen to while you were driving around,
Mm-hmm.
and certainly Iran was featured on there. I didn't know Space Age Love Song was. I do know that Space Age Love Song was more recently used in a movie about the 80s called 1984. It's a French-Canadian film that I actually very much enjoyed, but I didn't know it was used in many other things. I don't really remember Space Age Love Song from movies or anything along those lines. I just kind of discovered the song while researching the band and very much enjoyed it.
It's funny that you mentioned that you picked up a reference to the song in a French-Canadian movie, because really, if there is one group that's stuck in the early 1980s, it is a lot of French-Canadians. Living in Montreal, where I was, there were a lot of people that were really stuck in the early 80s, and I think if they still could do it, if they still had enough hair, they would do the Flock of Seagulls haircut to go with their jean jackets and everything. And I'm sure they're just waiting for acid wash to come back into fashion, but that's an entirely different thing.
They're sure as hell still doing the mullet, except they call it in Coupe Longueuil, I think.
Yes, the Longueuil is still the nickname for it, and yeah, it is still glorious in La Belle Province, to be sure. Now, one last little thing that I found about I Ran So Far Away is singer-songwriter Mike Score, who still tours under the name Flock of Seagulls, although the rest of the band has kind of moved on to other things. It's funny that he claims to actually kind of resent the song, but he plays it live just because the fans like it so much. It's funny that when you get a song to a certain level of popularity or ubiquity, that you kind of get tired of it, but you still got to play it anyway.
Absolutely. I think of Warrant and Cherry Pie, right? Pretty much killed the lead singer.
Well, I think it's pretty safe to say you are one of the few people that still think of Warrant these days. I think that's pretty safe to say. But that's another topic for another show.
Yeah, I guess he knew that heaven wasn't too far away.
Oh, I'm leaving that one in. It's not too. Right. It's never too soon. It's never too soon. Okay, so we come to the tracks that I picked, and
number 5.
That is correct. You are hearing underneath my voice the intro to Lou Bega's mega hit Mambo number 5, and I want to start off by saying I hate this song. I really can't stand it, and I'm not alone. I'll get to that in a moment. But first, I want to play a clip from its much less well-known sibling song off the same album. So let's have a listen. So that was a clip of a song called Tricky Tricky that was released in December of 1999 off the A Little Bit of Mambo album from Lou Bega. And I know you're just dying to ask, so just go ahead and ask, Lee. You can ask, what the hell was I thinking?
Well, yes, what the hell were you thinking?
You know what, when you mentioned this, the first song that came to mind was actually this. Now, for those of you who follow the TFC, you know that I don't just do the podcast, I also do photography, and of course part of the photography aspect of things is I do wedding photography, wedding receptions, and it is amazing how many couples, how many DJs have this on a do not playlist. Large events that I've done, weddings that I've done, it is on virtually every single do not playlist. In fact, I can remember about 2 years ago, I did a wedding, and as a joke, the father of the bride had maybe about a 5-second clip of the song played. And the look on the groom's face, because he wanted me to take a photo of the groom's face for his reaction. And it was priceless. It was amazing. It is a song that raises the ire of people. I think because, one, it's really stupid. It's a terrible song. I'm not going to lie. It seemed, in looking at this song, I saw that it was a cover/remake of a Cuban jive dance song from 1949. So basically a song that was 50 years old at that point. And it turned out to be such a bad remake/reboot/cover that it almost makes you wish that the Bay of Pigs invasion had been successful, or that the U.S. had basically nuked Cuba into the sea.
Well, you just took the lead for the worst comment made during this podcast. Well done.
I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that, because this song is absolutely wretched. It's funny because when I was working, I can remember where I was working at the time in 1999 when this song was at the height of popularity, and we had a radio station in our department that, was one of those typical top 40 stations, so you heard the song about 21 times a day. And we hated it. And when it came on, it was just like 4 minutes of wanting to beg for the sweet release of death, to not have to hear this anymore. And then in December of 99, there was another song that came out, and I remember them saying, we've got the new single from Lou Bega. And you know how radio stations are. They claim to be playing the new single, which is the same single they've been playing for the last 6 months. So yes. Naturally, I thought it was Mambo No. 5 coming up, and I'm like, oh god, I'm bracing myself for impact. It's, you're almost like in the fetal position, like when a plane is going down. And all of a sudden, this new song comes on, and I didn't recognize it at first. And I listened to it, and it, in comparison, didn't sound quite so bad. I think if this had been the lead-off, people would hate Lou Bega a whole lot less than they do right now. And agree, disagree. I'm not sure what you think. Well, you know what? What do you think? In agree, disagree. Do you think this would have made a better lead-off?
I kind of came up with my own question I was going to ask you, and it kind of goes along those lines. I had to ask the question. I said, if Rob had heard Tricky Tricky as many times as he heard Mambo No. 5, would Rob hate Tricky Tricky just as much as he hates Mambo No. 5? And that's when I started to wonder, is Tricky Tricky a better song, or do I just not hate it as much because it's not Mambo No. 5?
Okay, that's a great question. I'm pretty sure I would not hate it as much, because as repetitive as it is as a pop song, and it's very repetitive. Most modern pop songs are like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not nearly as bad as Mambo No. 5. Mambo No. 5 has 6 words in it and a list of women's names. That's
well,
about
the misogyny is kind of cool. I'm a big fan of misogyny, so I like that. But everything else about the song I hate.
It tries so hard to be, look at what kind of a hardcore guy I am. I'm going out to the clubs and I'm banging all these beautiful women, and this is the list of names of all the whores I'm with. And it's okay. That's fine. And you found yourself a cute little kind of Cuban-inspired jive backing beat to go with it, with that really annoying synth bass drum whatever going on.
Mm-hmm. Hate that stuff.
Yeah, it's terrible. And even more terrible, by the way, is the follow-up, because the song that I picked, Tricky Tricky, is actually the third single. It's not the second single. It's the third single off that album. There was a second single called I Got a Girl, which you can essentially call Mambo No. 5 Part 2. It's got the same beat. It has almost the exact same vocal delivery. and the lyrics start off 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Yeah, I agree with you. It is actually, it somehow managed to be worse than Mambo Number 5.
And it actually charted really well in Europe. The funny thing is I think this was a European-only single. I have no recollection of ever hearing it on the radio in North America, anywhere that I've been in North America. And thank God, because I think I would have been arrested for arson for burning down some of the radio stations for playing it. But I don't see any chart information for North America either. I see that it went to, I don't have it in front of me, but I think it went to like number 5 in Switzerland and like number 7 somewhere else, and kind of like...
And everybody knows if you make it big in Switzerland, you've made it big.
Well, yeah, I mean, well, look at what happened with chocolate. It's
true. Everybody's eating that shit nowadays.
Exactly. Chocolate, everybody wants a Swiss bank account, and apparently they want to listen to the sequel to Mambo Number 5, which is why Switzerland is the powerhouse of world culture that it is today.
Exactly.
But yeah, I don't see any chart information for North America. And in terms of Tricky Tricky, apparently more people wanted to listen to the insipid misogyny song because Tricky Tricky only reached the top 20 in one country, and that's Canada. In the US, it only went as high as number 74, meaning that people were like, yeah, it doesn't sound like Mambo Number 5, we're not interested.
It's crazy. Hearing that statistic almost made me ashamed of being Canadian.
It was rough.
I'm just kidding.
I thought for a second it was a typo. I was hoping it was like somewhere like Switzerland. But sadly, no. That was I'm going to blame the French Canadians for that one too.
I think they're to blame for most things, and we are French Canadians, so I guess that's well, I am.
You are. I am not. I only grew up in Quebec and left there as fast as I could.
Now, Rob, I don't know if you want me to wait, but I actually listened to the song Mambo Number 5, Tricky. And Tricky, and I even listened to that I Got a Girl.
My apologies.
And I listened to them multiple times for the sake of this podcast. And I wrote notes.
Oh God.
I wrote notes about the songs. Not a lot, because I was struggling to focus. But I did write some notes. Are you ready for them?
I am ready. Hold on. Allow me. You're gonna hear some noises in the background for those of you listening at home. I am bracing myself right now. I'm kind of adjusting my chair, getting myself set up with the microphone. I apologize for the background noise.
You may want to also pin your socks to your pants because I might knock them off right now.
Okay, I am ready for your notes.
So my notes are, I really, really dislike Mambo Number 5. I don't like that kind of music in general. That kind of dancey mambo music. I actually hate that stuff. I don't know why. I've just never been able to listen to it. It just gets it. I find it draining. It's physically draining to listen to that stuff. So I hate watching movies based in Cuba and things like that. I just can't stand it. The next thing I said is the only cool thing about Lou Bega is that his voice is kind of raspy, and I guess that's kind of cool. You know, he's got a little bit of rasp to his voice. And in I Got a Girl, the whole song is sung a tiny little bit higher in terms of the key, and he loses all of the rasp. So then you've got the shitty music and a shitty voice on top of it. And then I wrote that Tricky Tricky might be a tiny, tiny little bit better than Mambo Number 5, only because the chorus is a little bit more complex. And I actually, for a second, just really quickly, got a little bit of a... First, I wrote Smash Mouth vibe, but I kind of hate Smash Mouth. So then I wrote, or even a Doug and the Slugs vibe. Yes, I made a Doug and the Slugs reference in my notes. And I actually really like Doug and the Slugs. So that was pretty much all of the notes I wrote. Are your socks still on?
The socks are still on, but that's because I had my feet firmly planted on the floor, nice and flat, so nothing could happen to them. I'm not going to disagree. I think the part that made me think immediately of this song versus Mambo Number 5 was the chorus. There's more rhythmic elements. The rhythm of the way the chorus is delivered, each line has kind of a flow to it, whereas Mambo Number 5, it's Mambo Number 5 is like that.
Chorus?
Mambo Number 5, where he's listing off the names of the women, that's kind of the chorus, I guess. That's as close as it gets. But it's like that meathead jock in high school who had to write poems in English class, and he would rhyme the same words with themselves because he wasn't smart enough to come up with other words that rhymed.
Fair.
So, because the big cliche is sort of the Moon, June type of rhyme scheme. Well, instead of Moon and June, this is Moon with the word moon. That's Mambo Number 5. It doesn't even rise to the level of mediocrity in terms of its own internal rhyme scheme. Whereas Tricky, there's a flow to it. It actually, the words flow in the same way that the rhythm of a dancer would move, and sort of like Cuban jive type of dancing. I don't know if I'm sure someone will be terribly annoying and nitpicky, but if it's like a salsa beat, like the way dancers move to a salsa beat, the words flow in that same way.
I think that's fair, actually. That's why I highlighted the chorus. I said the chorus is by far the best part of that song, whereas with a Mambo Number 5, you can't really identify a better part because it's all the same.
It's all shit.
Yes.
The best part of Mambo Number 5 is when it ends.
Correct.
And
I honestly, well, no, just go ahead. I don't want to say what I was about to say.
Well, and I was going to follow it up with, and the best part about Lou Bega's career is that it appears to be over. That
is very nice compared to what I was about to say.
Yeah, I remember. Well, I for those of you at home listening, I got to see a sample of what Lee was going to say off air, and you're probably better with my version.
I think I might have ended up in jail or somewhere.
Oddly enough, that kind of an odd thing that you mentioned jail, but I'm going to leave it at that because I want to leave the rest to the imagination of our listeners. Which should be a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's pretty much what it is. I don't know why it immediately stormed into my mind. I think it's because I can remember how much I hated and still hate Mambo Number 5, to the point where 16 years later, DJs will refuse to play the song. It's funny because when you're shooting weddings as a photographer, you hang out with the DJ a lot. During like dinner and stuff like that, you tend to sit with the DJ while you're eating dinner and you talk about things because you want to go over cue points and where you're going to be and where the lights are going to be during like first dances and whatnot. And you go over things like the do not playlist. And I usually see Mambo Number 5 at the very, very top. It has surpassed the Macarena as the single most irritating song to play at parties.
When you told the story at the beginning where you said that most people have it on their do not playlist, I kind of felt a little bit of pride that the world is kind of okay. You see all these bad things on the news and whatnot. You hear about ISIS and all this stuff, and then you hear that people have Mambo Number 5 at the top of their do not playlist, and you're reminded that there is some good in the world.
Well, it's like the Dido song. It's not so bad. And,
that's right.
And that's pretty much where we can end it. It's not so bad. We will move on. We will rebuild a bigger, better, and hopefully less grating and irritating pop star. Hasn't happened yet, but there's hope. And with that, we're going to end this podcast here. For those of you who are looking to make suggestions for what we can do for future shows, we have a special email address set up, overunder@talesfromthecreek.ca. That is for anything relating specifically to the Over Under podcast, your feedback, your comments, and especially ideas of what you'd like to see in future shows. And if we get enough questions, maybe we'll just do a special episode, like an FAQ, kind of a verbal FAQ between Lee and I. And otherwise, we'll take your ideas and we will either roll with them, or we will get together and the two of us will have a good laugh making fun of you for suggesting stuff like this. So Lee, final thoughts.
Final thoughts. Everybody should go out and listen to Space Age Love Song again, and listen to any other songs from A Flock of Seagulls, because they're all kind of better, or not better, but all kind of good. If you listen to any of their somewhat successful singles that were not Iran, you'll enjoy it. Those are my final thoughts for the day.
Okay.
And I think we shit on Lou Bega enough today. I was about to say, before we started this, I was like, man, I feel like a German porn star because I'm about to shit all over Lou Bega. And it suits it because he's German.
He is German, in fact. I'm not sure if I want to follow that up with the final question, but I will go ahead anyway, because why not? Because final question. Final question to you. While people are listening to Flock of Seagulls and going back and reminiscing about things, should they be playing GTA Vice City and beating up hookers at the time?
Yes, and beat up guys as well, and pretend that they're Lou Bega.
Excellent. So with that, we're going to leave you for another episode of Over Under. I'm Robert Ryan, and on behalf of Lee Jansen from Best at Losing, good night.
Over Under is a production of Tales from the Creek Entertainment and is hosted by Lee Jansen and Robert Ryan. Check out Lee's videos on his YouTube channel, Best at Losing. For more from the TFC, check out our website at talesfromthecreek.ca.